discovery of dinosaurs was truly a fascinating breakthrough for the entire scientific community. The entire world was inspired by the discovery of these magical creatures that used to roam the earth. Novels, stories, even films were written about dinosaurs, and these creatures would come to light as the original rulers of the earth. But when have we ever asked ourselves, how did this come to be? How did people just like us come to discover these mystifying creatures? Well, this is the story we're going to walk you through. It all started with the discovery of fossils and bone remains. People have always been finding fossils and they haven't been knowing what to do with them. However, in 1787, an unknown man in New Jersey found an enormous thigh bone sticking out of a stream at a place called Woodbury Creek. He did not know what to do with them, nor could he relate it to any living organism he knows. The bone was later sent to Dr. Caspar Wistar, the nation's leading anatomist. Unfortunately, Wistar failed to acknowledge the bone's significance and totally dismissed of its importance. A year later, in 1788, French scientist Buffon made very interesting observations regarding land, water and soil, and even claimed that America was infertile. Thomas Jefferson was infuriated by these remarks and made it his objective to disprove Buffon's words. Happening also at the time, bones of what seemed to be a mammoth were discovered. Scientists at the time had extremely exaggerated imaginations regarding mammoths and their actual size. Later in 1795, scientist George Cuvier wrote a formal description of the extinct beast. He later came up with the theory you know today. Furthermore, in that same year, an English scientist named William Smith stated that there must be correlation between rocks and fossils. He stated that by knowing how old these rocks date and for how long they have been there, we could possibly relate these fossils to the animals they used to belong to. Later in 1812, another amazing discovery was made. A 12-year-old from England named Mary Anning found a 17-foot-long fossilized sea monster. She is the one who is said to give us the tongue twister, "She sells seashells by the seashore." She found the fossil of the first Plesiosaurus, a marine creature that used to exist, which took her 10 years to extract because she was very thorough and precise in extracting. In 1822, paleontologist Gideon Mantell from Sussex started to make very notable accomplishments. It started when his wife came back with an interesting tooth fossil. Mantell then called it the iguanodon for its similarity to the iguana. Mantell later sent the fossil to Cuvier, who thought it belonged to something else, only to realize later that it actually was a dinosaur tooth. When Mantell decided to submit the discovery of the iguanodon, he found that Reverend Buckland discovered a creature with the same description and called it a megalosaurus. However, that didn't stop Mantell. In 1833, Mantell discovered the Haliosaurus, and by then Mantell had the biggest fossil collection in the world. Unfortunately, Mantell had lots of enemies. His biggest one was Richard Owen, who spent a lot of his life making Mantell's life a living hell. Richard Owen was an expert on the anatomy of animals, and he was the only one who came up with the term Dinosauria, which actually means terrible lizard. Owen was not an ethical man himself, and later renamed and expunged many of the creatures Mantell discovered, thus taking credit for them. He also received the Royal Medal for a paper he stole, and he was caught several times plagiarizing work that was not his. As a result, Mantell ended up committing suicide, and ironically enough, his deformed spine was sent to Owen in the museum he directed. Later in 1868, scientists and partners Edward Cope and Othniel Marsh began to shine. They started out as friends, but they later turned against each other and became enemies. This turned their journey of fossil discoveries into a competition over who would discover more, and they started insulting each other and degrade each other's work. However, both of them combined were able to increase the number of known dinosaur species in America from 9 to almost 150 during their childlike quarrel. As for the others, Owen died in 1892, a few years before Cope or Marsh, and now has a statue in Natural History Museum. Buckland ended up by losing his mind and died a few years later. Mantell twisted his spine, killed himself shortly after Buckland. His spine remained on display at the Hunterian Museum for nearly a century before being mercifully obliterated by a German bomb in the Blitz. Of course, dinosaur hunting didn't end with the deaths of these great 19th century fossil hunters. Indeed, to a surprising extent, it had only just begun. In 1898, the year that fell between the deaths of Cope and Marsh, a trove greater by far than anything found before was discovered. In a place called Bone Cabin Quarry, only a few miles from Marsh's prime hunting ground at Como Bluff, Wyoming. However, the bones remain a mystery as to how old they actually date. This is the story of how dinosaurs came to be known to mankind, and how great scholars over the years have worked hard in order to bring such fascinating creatures to life.